record the sessions. Ariadna, you were here, but our students, Paula and Antonia, will help you keep track of time. Okay, so if you have any questions, comments, you can use the chat or you can raise your cyber hand and ask questions to Ariadna. So thanks again, and we are going to have the following presentation, Enhancing English Speaking Skills Through Self-Assessment Based Action Research by Ariadna Pinto and Claudio Díaz, Research Supervisor from Universidad de Concepción. Thank you very much.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. As you can see, I'm presenting by myself because my professor had something else to do. So, but he agreed on me presenting this research on my own. So, as you can see, this was part of a Fondesit research, which had to do with the estudio correlacional y propuesta de intervención en evaluación del aprendizaje del inglés. Okay, so I'm Ariadna, as I said before, and this action research was part of, actually it was my master's degree thesis that I worked on in order to get my master's. Okay, so basically today we're going to talk about this. We're going to give a brief introduction, talk about a little bit of theory regarding self-assessment, the methods that I used, the findings, which is the most interesting thing about an action research project, the conclusions, and of course I'm going to mention the references. Okay, so the aim of this research was to improve the university students' speaking skills through a self-assessment methodology, which was completely new for them. Okay. Where I work, I'm going to give you like a brief outline. We teach our students to produce the language rather than just producing the language speaking, I mean, rather than just having them translate or working with reading comprehension things. So that's what we require from them, that they are able to speak the language rather than just comprehend the language. Okay, so talking about a little bit of theory, we find that in order to obtain better results in the learning, we have to be able to provide our students some control and some authority of their own learning process. So if they do not involve our students in their own learning process, making them aware that they are learning something, then the result or the outcome that we look for as teachers might be a little misled in a way. Okay. So here we have the benefits of the self-assessment that I tried to show briefly in this chart. We have that on behalf of the students, we have a little of individualization of the work, reflection as well on their own learning process, as I said before. And on behalf of the teacher, we have I think that the most challenging of all is that we have to motivate our students, of course, evaluate them, that sometimes it's confused with grading in our society, and supporting our students. And the most difficult task, and I would say the hardest task, is to be monitoring constantly the development and the learning process that our students are experiencing during that stage. Okay, and the institution, of course, where we work, even if it's a school or a university, like in my case, has to be there in order to validate and justify the process that we are going through with self-assessment, because it takes a long time to demonstrate that self-assessment can be actually a benefit in the life of a student. So as I said before, learners are more involved, and what it's more important, I would say, is that they realize why they're learning this. Why is this beneficial for me? What am I getting from this? And the role of teachers changes a little bit as well, because we take the role of a guide more than just an instructor, and telling them, you have to do this, you have to do that, but what's the reason? Why am I doing this? Why is this beneficial for me? So the teacher gets to be a guide more than just an instructor, okay? In terms of oral proficiency, this is, of course, it's with the beginning of the communicative approach, we see that this is of more interest in teachers to achieve in their students that they can communicate in the language, right? And how do we measure this? By the ability of having a short conversation in the target language, that in our case is English, right? So here, just to outline, what we focused here is just on the productive skill, which is speaking, okay? The research problem here is that where I currently work, students are required to manage a certain level of English depending on their the program that they are in. I would say that 80 or 80 something percent of the students I worked with come from the engineering program. So most of them, future engineers, are required to have English as a part of their compulsory curriculum in our university. So some of them are required to achieve A2 from the Common European Framework, or some of them even B2, but I would say a little bit less than B2 and a little bit more than B1, something in between. It depends, of course, on their curriculum, okay? And what I encountered is that some students failed to accomplish the expected ability outcome from the English course that I teach at the university. So that was the main problem. So by implementing the self-assessment, could this contribute to improve the speaking skills in my students? That's what I was wondering, if by making them part of their own learning process, I could somehow help them improve their English speaking skills. So for that, I had two specific objectives: to assess the effectiveness of self-assessment on student speaking skills, and to explore the participants' perceptions on their self-assessment as a strategy to improve their English speaking skills. The research participants were 22 A1 level students, and they are from a Chilean private university in Concepcion, where English is compulsory, as I said, for the curriculum. And this course takes about 16 weeks, okay? So in the first session, we conducted an initial oral interview, and I used an analytic rubric in order to evaluate their performance, okay? Then through sessions 2 through 5, I gave the content of the lesson, which I'll show you in a few more minutes. I also had them do a learning journal and a self-assessment scale that I will show you in a few more minutes. And in session 6, I conducted a focus group with some of the students who were part of this research. In session 7, I conducted the same oral interview, and I used the same analytic rubric in order to compare results, to see if the methodology that I was applying actually worked. And I can show you here, this is an example of the questions that we asked them during the interview. Like, for example, what is your address? What do you do? What do you study? Then we asked them to describe a picture. I, of course, because of the layout of the slide, I chose only one set of pictures. And then we give them an imaginary situation in which they have to role play. that was this is the outline of the interview that we conducted at the beginning and at the end of the study. Excuse me. This is the analytic rubric that we used at the time. I have to say that we no longer use the same version of the analytic rubric because, of course, as you know, as an instrument of evaluation, it goes through many stages. We take out some things that we think it's not useful anymore, but we modify our instruments as time goes by. But this is the one that but basically we covered vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, fluency, and comprehension and communication, which are the basics that we all teachers of English somehow manage when evaluating speaking. This is the self-assessment instrument that I used with the different topics. The topics that I covered in each session were household chores, directions, locations, and then directions, giving directions. And then finally, we ended with shopping, okay? I chose to conduct these instruments in Spanish because, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I work with A1 students, with A1 level students. So I wanted them to feel comfortable with the instrument that I was telling them to take extra, if you can say, after we finished with the lesson. So I wanted them to focus more on the experience of learning rather than in the content. I didn't want to cause any sort of frustration if they didn't understand, for example, the instrument. And this is the learning journal, which had the question, for example, para mí lo más importante ha sido, este contenido me causó dudas porque, and I was very surprised with the answers of we'll see the results in a few minutes. And this was the focus group. Thank you. Basically, do you think that you improved your English speaking abilities after we finished with the self-assessment methodology? And the findings showed, I know it's a bunch of numbers there, but I can tell you from out of the 22 participants that I had, only 3 lowered their scores, 3 maintained their scores, and 16 improved. So to me, that's a significant amount of students who did improve their results before the intervention and after the intervention with the analytic rubric that I showed you at the beginning, after taking the final interview. With the self-assessment scale, this was the question that called my attention the most, and it's, I can apply in other occasions what I learned today. In session 1, as you can see, the on the way chart is way higher than the one that says, yes, I can. But then as sessions went by, the yes answer continued growing. So students now know what they are expected to achieve, and they manage to, okay, so I feel confident enough to apply the content in another situation, right? And this was something that I found with the learning journal, that the most important thing, or the most important learning goal for my students, was to be able of using vocabulary. They were worried about acquiring vocabulary, and some of them, of course, answered that everything in the class was important. But here, a small amount considered that using grammar properly was the most important, which also called my attention because I'm a teacher of English, so sometimes we focus more on the structure of things. And this was also that called my attention, is that most of the students thought that class had become more fun for them. Now that with the implementation of self-assessments, they had a better time than, not that they didn't have a better time before, but now that they were enjoying more and they were interacting more, which is the whole point of my lessons, that they can speak to each other and share English, just trying and making mistakes. With the focus group, I came across these results with the usefulness of self-assessment. my students considered that it was going to be useful for future students, and that they become more aware about what was being learned in class. Towards this methodology, some of my students said that the peers had a positive reaction, but sometimes they were kind of lazy when they had to complete the learning journal or when they had to fill in the chart about the self-assessment. After a few sessions, they got a little bit tired of doing that. And some of them mentioned that the self-assessment part of the course should be formally included in the lessons for everyone. And some of them actually said that self-assessment can be difficult for students because sometimes they confuse self-assessment with assigning themselves a better grade in order to pass the subject. And they also said, in terms of their English speaking abilities, that there was a huge difference before and after self-assessment, that even they thought that the speaking activities that I gave them as tasks during the class were better when we had implemented the self-assessment, and that they were practicing more. And they struggled with these English abilities, pronunciation, fluency, and grammar. Of course, in terms of the specific objective number 1, this was mainly a formative process. It had nothing to do with their final grade in the subject. And the objective grading was not present, as I said before, and the objective was measured with the analytic rubric that I used twice, as I said before. I actually compared my research with a similar one conducted at a Filipino college, where 48% of their students said that they felt like they felt more confident, but they didn't achieve the expected outcomes. And here we, with terms of the perception, is that the students gained more autonomy regarding their own learning process. And some of them were still in between, thinking that maybe they needed to acquire more written tasks in order to be more proficient in the written, but that it was not part of the research, but that was something that I encountered with the results. Some of the limitations of the study was the inclusion of all instruments, because it takes a lot of effort on behalf of the students and the teacher that we have to be reading. And fortunately, I have the time to do it. And but I understand that maybe in some schools, when you have 40 hours of teaching and no time for checking, it might be a little bit complicated. The pace of the lesson had to be all restructured because we had to leave time for the self-assessment. Some of the students that I had were not entirely autonomous, and I wonder if the instrument was entirely reliable, or if I was, for example, reading something that my students would think that it would please me to read. So those are the limitations, of course. And the implications is that this changes the role of the teacher, in the sense that we are more of a guide than just giving them instructions for them to accomplish. And that, of course, students can reflect upon their own learning process. So my students, as a conclusion, improved their results. They were really involved with the methodology, which surprised me a lot. And I had a great participation of students, and we generated a comfortable environment in the classroom. And out of the 22, I would say that, I don't know, 18 of my students were highly motivated. As attendance is compulsory for us, but you can still skip some classes and make up for them later on. So, but while I was conducting this study, my students all showed up for the 8 sessions of the research. And some of my personal reflections was that this was an opportunity for reflection, to make them aware of their learning process, and all the instruments that we applied in the research can be easily applied as well in our as part of our practice, as part of our teaching practice. So some of the recommendations that came from the students were that we should apply the method from the beginning of the semester, that it should be permanent. And this surprised me the most. My students suggested that we should compare the results with more research about it. So this was a suggestion from them. Sorry, those are some of the references from the theoretical framework that I showed you at the beginning of the lesson. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ariadna, for your presentation. It was very interesting, a very interesting study. So now we leave the room and the chat open for questions, comments, and feedback.